Hello there, artists! In this lesson, we're going to learn how to transform a two-dimensional shape, the circle, into what appears to be a three-dimensional form. So, for a quick review, remember that a two-dimensional shape has height and width, so how tall it is and how wide it is, whereas a three-dimensional form has height, width, and depth, so how tall it is, how wide it is, and then the measurement of volume or from front to back or how deep it is. Okay. So before we get started, let's talk about the materials you're going to need. You are going to need a sheet of white copy paper. I would suggest folding it into quarters and using 1/4 of the sheet for your drawing. You're going to need a pencil, an eraser, and if you have it, either a tissue or maybe a little sheet of toilet paper, just a little square. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing I want you to do is draw a circle on your paper, and you can follow along with me. Don't worry if your circle is a bit woggedy, it doesn't need to be perfect. However, if you're somebody who really wants to have a perfect circle, you could look for an object in your house that is circular in shape, such as a coffee cup, anything like that you could use as a pattern. But whatever you do, do not draw a dark outline around your circle. So I'm just going to lightly begin to sketch out my circle, and it's probably not going to be perfect, and that's okay because this is an exercise. Hopefully it's dark enough that you can see it. I think you can. I can see it on the screen as I'm doing this. And you're just going to sketch it very lightly. So the reason we don't want that very dark circle is that is going to actually flatten our shape out later once we begin to add the shading. So we're not going to make that too dark. Okay, so we've got the basic circle done. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to determine where our light source is. Okay, so you're asking me, what's a light source? Well, a light source in art simply refers to the direction the light is coming from and how it's hitting your object that you're drawing. So for this exercise, we are just going to place an imaginary light source right up here. So I always just like to draw it like this, little circle, and the light rays are coming down onto the circle. So this is our light source. Okay. So that's going to be our light source. And I just wrote that very lightly and drew that lightly because we can erase that later on. And if I do it darkly, of course, I'm not going to be able to erase it. Okay, so we've got our light source there. So our next step is to add a cast shadow. So this is the shadow that is created when the light hits the object. So while we're doing this, is a good time to review how we change the value of a color from light to dark. So let's talk about that. When we're using our pencil, the more pressure we put on the pencil, the darker the color is going to be. The less pressure we put on the pencil, the lighter the value will be. Okay, so an easy way to adjust this is if we want more pressure, we're going to hold our pencil lower down and put more pressure. If we want the pressure to be much lighter, we're going to move our hand to the top of the pencil, which will really change the pressure for us so that we're getting a much lighter value. Okay, and value just refers to how light or dark a color is. So now that we have that, let's do a cast shadow. Okay, so I'm going to do my cast shadow right beneath this ball, and I'm just going to start small, and I'm taking it out to the side, and I'm following around the contour, which is the outline of the circle, and I am creating my cast shadow. So this one, we're really, this is a practice one to help us get the hang of doing this. And then as we go, we'll move into actually drawing from observation. But for now, we're just going to practice this together. Okay, so I can go back in here later and darken this up if I want to, or shade it out further. So we're going to start with this, with our cast shadow. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add some shading to the circle. Okay. So notice that the side closest to the light source is going to have the least amount of shading. And the side farthest away from the light source is probably going to be our darkest. Okay, so you're going to follow along with me. You're going to pause the video as needed, and hopefully you'll have a pretty good idea of how to do this once we're finished with this exercise. Okay, so I'm gonna start by, some people like to draw circles to do their shading. I don't do that because I don't want a distinct outline. So I'm just gonna think about starting some of my darkest shading. And I usually start really with a medium value. You can always layer on more pencil, but it can get harder to take it off. So I'm also thinking about the contour of my circle, and I'm moving my pencil following those directions, okay? Again, bring this down a little bit further, towards a little bit closer to the edge of the circle I drew. And this isn't super neat right now, and it doesn't really have to be, okay? We'll look into cleaning this up and making it a little bit more presentable once we get closer to being done. Okay, so as I move out here, I believe, so I wasn't looking at the screen as I did this, but I naturally move my hand up as I know I'm going to begin to change to a lighter value. So I'm going to continue to lighten the pressure here so that my value is lighter for this layer. And again, remember, you can always go back in and make it darker. So, you know, if you want to start lightly, that's a good idea, because we can build that value so that it's darker as we go. So I'm going to bring that up just a little bit. You can pull some of the color out by using an eraser later if you need to, but it's actually, in my opinion, a little bit harder to work that way. Okay, so now I'm going to add in the lightest of my values that I'm probably going to do. A little bit around the edges. And what we're doing right now by leaving this area white is we are creating a highlight, okay? I'm gonna go back to this edge that I started here, and I'm gonna add a slightly lighter value. So, you know, depending on where your light source was in real life, this might look different. But because this is just an imaginary one right now, I'm really going to darken this up here. I'm going to move my hand down much further. I'm really going to put that pressure on there. And I'm going to start darkening this area up some more so there isn't quite such a distinct line. Not being super neat as I do this. I'm going to put a little bit of a darker edge right there. At the end, I'll go back through and clean up these edges a little bit with my eraser. So now what I'm going to begin to do is, in a minute here, I'm going to start blending my colors a little bit. I'm just layering on some of that dark value that we have here. Now I'm going to take my tissue, and you guys probably have heard me say this before, but our hands have natural oils in them, especially if we put a lotion on, or we even used a soap that has some essential oils on it. And even if we haven't done that, our hands have oils in them. So the reason we are using a tissue to blend is so that we're not depositing any oils onto the paper, because when we deposit oils onto the paper, it actually makes the graphite, which is what's inside of this, is not lead, it's actually called graphite. It actually makes the graphite stick to those areas more than it does in other areas. So it's not the end of the world at this point in your career if you are blending with your finger, but let's, if you have a piece of toilet paper at home that you can use for your blending, that's going to get you off to a better start. Because you won't develop any bad habits from the get-go. So I'm just going through and blending this out a little bit. To kind of remove some of those more distinct lines, I'm going to start using my eraser. Our eraser is a drawing tool. So I'm going to start pulling off some of those edges where maybe I got a little bit too sloppy or I want to clean it up. And then I'm going to continue to work on my shading until I'm happy with it. And this is not a drawing pencil. So this is just a regular pencil like you might use in school. If you have drawing pencils at home, you would probably get a better product, but because I'm trying to use the tools that you guys have at home, I am using just a regular old pencil. Now we're just going in and refining. Shading is a really important skill as you become a more advanced artist to understand and to be able to do. So that's why we're going to spend some time on that this year. If you did the assignments in the spring with us during distance learning, then this should be some review for you. Sure you don't press so hard on your pencil that you actually end up tearing the page. That can happen. Actually, hear my pencil squeaking a little bit. Okay, so I'm starting to get to a point where I'm feeling happy with it. We're getting there. Little bit. I don't have any lines that are too distinct. The thing is, it does lift some of the value, which is the color, off of the circle as you're working, so you can see on my tissue, and I'm starting to pick up some of that color. So now I'm going to go back in with my eraser and I'm going to pull out or pop out some of those highlights with the edge of my eraser. Okay, and then I'm going to come up in here and pull some of the highlights out up here to really make this pop. So the highlight is really where the light would be hitting it, or to make it really shine brightly. And those highlights and those very dark darks that we have in our artwork are really what make our shading stand out. I'm going to clean up this edge. And pull off some of the color on the outside. Okay, it's looking pretty good. And now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to darken up my cast shadow a little bit. So remember that cast shadow is created by the light hitting the object that we're actually drawing. And that really helps to ground the object as well in our drawing. Building this up as I go. Like I said, we can always add more. We can't necessarily pull it off. Good for now. Certainly I could work on it more, but I think you've probably got a fairly good idea of how to do this at this point. So I'm just going to go back in a little bit with my tissue and just blend those little areas out a little bit. It just softens it up a little bit, makes it so that the values are not so delineated, meaning that there aren't crisp lines marking where one value ends and one value stops. Although we do want that with our highlights, we don't necessarily want to see a bunch of lines. Okay, so there we have a circle. So we started with a shape, which was a circle. And I should say there we have our sphere. So what I've done is I've taken this basic shape of a circle and I have created a form. It's the illusion of form because we know on a surface such as a paper, which is two-dimensional, we can't actually have a three-dimensional object on our paper, but we can create the illusion of a three-dimensional object. So there you have it. This is a really important tool for all artists to have. It's a great skill to practice no matter where you are in your artistic career. So you're going to practice this and you're going to look at the rest of the directions with the assignment. But what I want you to do from here, after you've done this, you're going to save this because you're going to have to show it to me. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to find a circular object in your house, such as an apple, an egg, or a ball, and attempt to represent the object using the skills we've learned here for this assignment. Okay? You're only going to use pencil. So remember that we're doing all of this with regular old pencil. All right, there we go.